All right. Welcome. I am Megan Golden. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Mission Cure, and I'm here with my colleagues, my co-founder and board chair, Linda Martin, and also my colleagues, Lola Rakib, Shruti Mira Shankar, who you meet in a second, and Sky Schrader. I welcome you to this webinar on clinical trials for chronic and recurrent acute pancreatitis patients and their families. We have over 220 people registered, and we're excited to get going. My brother Eric and I co-founded Mission Cure in 2017 after he was diagnosed with chronic pancreatitis. When we learned that there were no approved treatments to stop or reverse the disease, we really set a goal of finding effective treatments within 10 years. Linda, whose daughter Amy was also suffering from chronic pancreatitis, joined us immediately thereafter. And we're now 5 years old at Mission Cure. We've made a lot of progress. We're at the point where there are actually several clinical trials testing treatments or studying options for pancreatitis patients. And we are working to get more clinical trials of new therapies started, so stay tuned. We thank AbbVie for supporting our patient education program, which includes this webinar. Agenda. This is the agenda for the webinar today, and to go through it in greater detail and to get us kicked off, I want to introduce our new patient education project manager, Shruti Mira Shankar. Shruti joined Mission Cure earlier this summer, and she is a chronic pancreatitis patient herself, and she has extensive personal experience and professional experience that she's bringing to the organization. So she'll tell you more about the topic we're covering today and our panel of speakers. Shruti, take it from here.
Thank you, Megan. Our webinar topic for today is pancreatitis therapies and clinical trials available for pancreatitis patients. We chose this topic on our panel because we are frequently asked what treatments and advances exist for this progressive disease, and we now have trial options we can share with you. This webinar aims to provide you with information on what are clinical trials and what it means to participate in one. We have featured clinical trials currently recruiting across the US and Canada, and address any questions about the trials and the enrollment process. The information shared today can make a difference to the whole pancreatitis community in finding effective treatments through clinical trial participation and empower you to make choices suitable for your needs. Before we start, please know that this webinar will be recorded and posted on the Mission Cure website. You've joined in listen-only mode, meaning we can't hear you. If you have any questions, there is a Q&A option on your toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Please type them into the box. At the end of this webinar, we have set aside time for our speakers to answer them. Since we have multiple speakers, if your questions are about a particular trial or speaker, please include the name so we can address it accordingly. Let's dive into our program for the day. I now welcome our first panelist, Julianne Mills, a trained epidemiologist with over 20 years of experience developing treatments and cures for patients with rare diseases. She is the Senior Director at Worldwide Clinical Trials, a clinical research organization. She will discuss the clinical trial process and its importance in finding effective treatments and cures. Over to you, Julianne.
Thanks so much, Shruti. Thanks to Megan as well for the opportunity to speak with you today. And congratulations to Mission Cure for all the work that you've done so far. 5 trials is a lot. My goal today is to give you some basic information that will help you understand the other presentations we're going to hear today about clinical trials for pancreatitis. Let me begin by making sure that we're all on the same page with respect to our language. Throughout today, you may hear the terms clinical trials, clinical research studies, clinical studies. All of these terms are used interchangeably, and they all refer to a process for collecting information to understand if a new medicine is safe and if it works. Clinical trials can be interventional, meaning there's something about the study that intervenes with your normal standard of care. During the study, you may get a drug that's not approved or a procedure that isn't normally done. And you may see or hear these types of trials also referred to as phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and we're going to hear about a phase 1 study today. Clinical trials may also be observational, meaning all they do is observe and record information about how you normally receive care and what some of your results may be. There's nothing new that's done, no new medicine, no new procedure, no new test that you have to undergo. And natural history studies are observational in some registries as well. Go to the next slide. I want to share that clinical trials are important because they are the only way for us to capture objective, unbiased data to learn whether a new medicine or procedure or test is safe and if it works. Trials are done for new medicines. Before a drug can be sold, there must be evidence to show that it is safe and that it works. Trials may also be done for new treatments and procedures, such as to learn if an already approved drug works better or worse when used in combination with other medicines. Trials can also be done to learn if a medicine is safe in a specific group of patients, such as testing if a medicine approved in adults is also safe to use in children. Trials are also done to validate new types of tests, and we'll hear about this type of trial later. For example, some cancers, the gold standard for diagnosis in these cancers is a biopsy, and biopsies take time. They are not without risk. And what if we could replace the biopsy with a blood test instead? In order to do that, we would need to do a trial to make sure that the blood test can produce results that are just as sensitive and as accurate as the biopsy. Next slide, please. Clinical trials for new medicines follow this same basic path to approval. First, there are experiments that are done in cells or animals. This is referred to as preclinical. And if the medicine looks like it might be safe, then it would move to phase 1, where it might be given to healthy volunteers or to patients with a known diagnosis. In each phase of testing, from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3, you'll see on this slide that the number of volunteers increases and the duration of participation in the study increases. In phase 1, only a few volunteers will participate and maybe only for a few weeks. By phase 3, we may be looking at hundreds of patients participating, and they may participate for several months or even years. Next slide, please. But no matter what type of trial is done, procedure, medicine, test, new medicine, phase 1, phase 3, all trials involving humans must follow standards to protect the safety, welfare, and rights of volunteers. Every trial is reviewed by an oversight board. Depending on the risks involved in the study, there may be multiple levels of oversight for a trial, such as at the local level, institution, and national. The whole purpose of the oversight board is to ensure that the risks of the trial are balanced with any benefits for participation. And the safety of trial volunteers is continuously evaluated from the moment they sign the consent form to the moment they complete the study, however long that takes, weeks, months, or years. Next slide. So why would someone volunteer for a trial? I've listed a few reasons here, and one or more of these may resonate with you, or you may have your own reasons that are not mentioned, and you're welcome to share those in the chat. You may participate so that doctors can determine the best treatment options for treating pancreatitis or your type of pancreatitis. You may want to participate to help develop an accurate screening tool for pancreatic cancer. Or you may be motivated by altruistic reasons and want to help others who are dealing with the same condition as you. And it's also possible that you may want to participate because you might receive more or additional attention from your doctor if you participate in a clinical trial, just because you'll have more frequent visits than you normally would as part of participation. Next slide, please. We'll hear from Jonathan later on and what it was like for him to participate in a clinical trial, but I wanted to go over the steps at a high level of what most trials involve and what most volunteers can expect. Each clinical trial follows a plan called a protocol, and that protocol defines all the rules of the study. The first step in the trial participation process for volunteers is consent. You'll be given something called a consent form. It may also be referred to as an informed consent form, and you should read and digest this form. It's written in plain language, it's supposed to be, and describes the benefits and risks of the study and what you can expect during participation. You should read this carefully. You should read it more than once, and you should take some time to discuss it with someone that you trust, such as a family member or a doctor like your GP. If you have any questions about the form or about what it says, it is literally the job of the doctor and the nurse to make sure that all of your questions are answered. So don't be afraid to ask. The next step in the process is screening. Screening is something every volunteer undergoes to make sure that they meet the eligibility criteria. Eligibility criteria is a description or a listing of characteristics for the volunteers who are needed for the study. This description may include things like gender. Maybe we're only interested in studying the medicine in women. Age. This is going to be a study that only involves adults, no kids. And disease severity. This is a medicine we think will only work in people with very severe disease, and any other parameters. And you may need to do some tests in order to confirm if you meet the eligibility criteria for the study. If you do, then you can go on to enroll in the study and participate in the assessments. The protocol and the informed consent form will include a description of the assessments or tests that will be done after you're eligible and enrolled in the study. And these may be blood tests or other types of invasive tests, or they may be non-invasive, like answering questions about your pain, your past medical history, or any attacks that you might have. If you're considering participating in a clinical trial, my best advice is to ask questions. This is by no means a complete list, but only suggestions of questions to ask. Things like, will I be given a new or already approved medicine? Where there'll be a placebo, or will you know if you get the quote unquote real medicine? Where do you have to go to participate? Can you get care for the trial at your normal doctor's office, or do you have to go to a specialty lab? Will the assessments be done during your normal office, or do you have to go more frequently? Will you get to see the results of any of those tests? And this is my pet peeve, will you get reimbursed for any out-of-pocket expenses like lost wages for participating, parking, meals, childcare, babysitting, so that you can participate in the study? These are all great questions to ask. That's all I have for now. If we go to the next slide, but these are some QR codes that will take you to some additional references. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, or you're always welcome to email me directly. Thanks very much.
Thank you for sharing valuable information on clinical trials and how to engage with the process as an informed patient, Julianne. Please type in any questions for her in the Q&A section. Links to all the resources mentioned in the webinar slides will be posted on our website with the recording tomorrow. I now welcome our second panelist, Dr. Stephen Pandol, a practicing doctor, Director of Basic and Translational Pancreas Research, and leader of translational oncology at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. He's also a professor of medicine at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. He's the principal investigator of the Alliance trial based in Los Angeles, California. And the trial he will present tests the effect of paricalcitol, a vitamin D-like drug compound, for treating chronic pancreatitis. The focus is on measuring the reduction of pain, digestive symptom improvement, and quality of life in patients. Over to you, Dr. Pandol.
Thank you so much, Shruti. And also I want to congratulate Megan, Linda, and the team for remarkable progress. I've been interacting with them since they started 5 years ago, and it's amazing the progress that they've made and what they brought to the community. So I'm going to take off from where Julianne Mills left us and describe a specific trial, but all the characteristics of a trial that she described are in this trial. So what is this trial? What is paracalcitol? So first I'll mention that paracalcitol is a vitamin D-like molecule. It's a very potent vitamin D molecule, and it's been used for several years, decades actually, for patients with certain types of kidney disease and been demonstrated to be safe there. And I'll describe why we think it would work in chronic pancreatitis in this presentation. And it is our hope that the paracalcitol treatment will improve the symptoms and reduce pain of chronic pancreatitis where there, as you know, currently no non-surgical option. So the investigators on this trial are myself, Mark Goodman, who is a PhD epidemiologist here at Cedars-Sinai, Dr. Debail Lee, who's an expert in advanced methods of MRI, and we're using MRI to monitor the progress during the treatment. Dr. Temel Turks, who is a colleague of ours in Indiana, who's also an expert in MRI and complements our skills here. And Dr. Ron Evans, who is a researcher at Salk Institute in San Diego. And he actually is the inspiration from findings in his group for this trial. And he is a member of the team as well. And I'll describe the work that he has provided that give the justification for this trial. And I must say, in trials, generally, we need some kind of justification for it likely working with animal models and such beforehand. And his work does that. So what are the, excuse me for the phone, it'll stop. What are the study details? To be eligible, you must be 18 to 75 years old. You must have the diagnosis of chronic pancreatitis. And the trial at this point is only at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. And as I will describe later, it will also be expanded throughout the country after this first part of the trial. What is involved? There's 4 outpatient visits to Cedars-Sinai in a period over 1 year. During the trial, there's blood draws, questionnaires, medical record reviews, and also MRIs, which I neglected to put on there. The cost, there is no cost for the research procedures. There is compensation for the participants' time. And the recruitment period is from April 2023 to May 2024. So we are currently recruiting. And the treatment period is 1 year, and we're to be completed by June of 2025. Next, please. So our hypothesis for this trial, and trials have a hypothesis and then ways to test the hypothesis. So our hypothesis for this one is that paracalcitol will have a significant benefit for relieving symptoms, mainly pain, that degrade the quality of life based on preclinical studies that show that vitamin D analogs inhibit both pro-inflammatory responses and pain of chronic pancreatitis. Next, please. So this is a slide I made up to describe in a concept, how the agent paracalcitol would work. And again, it's a high potency vitamin D analog, and it affects the fibrosis and inflammation that are the key components of chronic pancreatitis. And in the picture, I will point out a few elements of the picture to understand how this works. So as you'll see, there's this molecule called TGF-beta. It's a molecule that really drives the disease with participation of the cell that's to the right called activated stellate cell, and the cell that's to the left called alternatively activated macrophage. TGF-beta, as you see by the arrow, stimulates the stellate cell to make these compounds called IL-4 and IL-13, which go up to the alternatively activated macrophage to make TGF-beta. And then you see TGF-beta actually goes in an arrow to the pancreas to cause inflammation and fibrosis, but it also goes back and activates the activated stellate cell again to promote this feed-forward process to make more and more TGF-beta. What paracalcitol does, as you can see by the block from the pill that's green and white, block that TGF-beta cycling. So that's how it works. TGF-beta also signals to the brain through this sensory neurons and SMAD3 signaling, just so you're aware. So it's quite complicated, but the animal studies that precede this justify its use to affect these pathways that are key and central to the disease. Next, please. So why participate? Study impact and its aims. The study is an initial stage of investigating whether paracalcitology could benefit individuals with chronic pain while also exploring specific markers to determine its effectiveness. It's a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. That means neither the patient nor the doctor know what the actual, whether they're getting placebo or the actual drug. That's only known by a person who has the codes for that. During the process, we monitor health-related quality of life measures. Those include pain and all subsequent outcomes of pain, imaging, as I indicated before, with advanced MRI procedures, and blood-based biomarkers to identify measures that could be used to show that the drug is effective in a larger clinical trial. Next, please. So, what do you need to know? Well, if this study is of interest, please get a hold of us. So I have the information for Robert Marker with his telephone number and his email here. Robert communicates with me on anybody who's interested, and then I will have a conversation with you about the trial. And there is a flyer that you can see attached that helps you understand the trial more. And it's also, as our trials are done, it's on the website for the U.S. government called clinicaltrials.gov. And it has this number here, and the slides will be available for that number. And you can look up the details of it on that site. Thank you so much.
I'm going to jump in here for a second. Thank you so much, Dr. Pandal. I'm just want to say a word about why Mission Cure is excited about this. Paracalcitol is something that, as Dr. Pandal said, has been available for a long time, has been used in a lot of people, and we have a lot of information about its safety. And so what we don't have information on is its specific effectiveness on treating chronic pancreatitis. If we can complete this study and if it is effective, then it will be readily available for patients and not have to go through a lengthy process that a new drug would have to go through. So that's why we're especially excited about this trial.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you both. Thank you for informing our patient community about the paracalcitol trial, Dr. Pandal. If successful, this trial, like Megan said, could offer new hope by potentially introducing a promising treatment option that addresses the challenges faced by chronic pancreatitis patients, leading to an improved symptom management and a better quality of life. If the audience has any questions about this trial, please type them in the Q&A box. I now welcome our third panelist, Dr. Harmeet Dani. Dr. Dani is a surgeon scientist who completed his medical degree from St. George's University and is the Director of Medical Affairs at Biological Dynamics. He is the principal investigator of the ExoLuminate Trial based in California and Florida. The ExoLuminate Trial he will present aims to detect early pancreatic cancer in high-risk individuals like those with pancreatitis, genetic mutations, and family cancer history, using a non-invasive blood test versus currently available methods. Over to you, Dr. Dani.
Thank you so much, Shruti, and really thank you to Mission Cure for having me as a host. It's been an absolute pleasure working with this group and all the panelists here. So again, thank you. Before I kind of step inside for the trial purposes, I wanted to take a step back and really talk a little bit about the statistics around pancreatic cancer. I'm sure this audience knows and is well informed, but it really drives this clinical unmet need for where our study was manifested from. So as we know, pancreatic cancer is a really deadly disease. In fact, most patients that are diagnosed in the late stages, where really therapies and surgery are kind of in a narrowed window. Specifically with patients with hereditary pancreatitis, or SSS1 mutations, have about a 50 to 80-fold increased relative risk for developing pancreatic cancer. Patients with chronic pancreatitis have about a 13-fold, and then those with acute pancreatitis have about an 8-fold increased risk for developing pancreatic cancer. Next slide, please. And because of that, we were driven as a company and as a medical director to create the ExoLuminate study. So what is it? This is a study that is a prospective study. It's observational and it's nationally enrolling, where we will investigate the early detection of pancreatic cancer in those patients that are at high risk or patients that are clinically suspicious on imaging using a novel liquid biopsy test that we created based on exosomes. It is our hope that by detecting cancer earlier, we can shift patients hopefully into an earlier treatment and surgery. There's a higher chance for survival. Our patented technology uses what's called exosomes for a biomarker test with a sensitivity and a specificity of greater than 90%. Next slide, please. Perfect. So our unique specialty is exosomes, but what are exosomes? Exosomes are a subgroup of a bigger molecule called extracellular vesicles, EVs. EVs are noted in myself, normal people, healthy people, and diseased people as well. These vesicles carry a diverse cargo. They carry proteins, they have DNA, they have RNA, amino acids, and even metabolites. In fact, literature has shown that there is a strong signal in early cancer detection and other disease states with exosomes. And clinicians and providers across the board are really interested in using exosomes isolation to identify patients for earlier intervention and care. And pharma biotech right now currently are researching exosomes for drug delivery. Go next, please. So when we kind of package the exosomes with our technology with a clinical unmet need, we have this ExoLuminate study. And so who qualifies for this study? So patients that are greater than 18 years old are included with either one or two cohorts. The first cohort is the high-risk population cohort. And within that cohort there are patients that have acute pancreatitis, patients that have chronic pancreatitis, and then those that have hereditary pancreatitis with a PRSS1 mutation that's documented. Also, those are family members who have at least one first-degree relative that's affected by pancreatic cancer. Patients that have cysts on their pancreas called IPMNs or intraductal papillary mucinous neoplasms. Additionally, there are those patients included or eligible will be germline mutations known to be associated with cancer, specifically pancreatic cancer. And if you look on the right, there's a bit of a table there that shows some of the germline mutations, including the BRCA1, BRCA2, PALB2 mutations, and so on and so forth. And last, there is the cohort that is clinically suspicious on imaging or those patients that are actually diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. On the right, you can see those patients that are not eligible for a trial. Some of those include active cancer or treatment for active cancer, any prior organ or bone marrow transplant, and anybody that is pregnant. Next slide, please. So when you double click on our study details, we're kind of nationally rolled out to 20 locations and also expanding within the next few months. There is an option for a mobile phlebotomy, which is essentially an at-home blood donation draw. In order to access this, though, you have to be eligible and included at a participating site. And so depending on the participating site of your local institution, there also may be an option for telehealth services as well. So what is involved in participating in this study? Well, there will be a blood draw. We'll look at your medical records and review them, and then there'll be some clinical follow-ups. Particularly, there will be 3 blood draws spaced out over 6 months for 1 year total, and we will follow that up with any other imaging or standard of care that patients will go through. It's a 3-year follow-up, and there is compensation available, and it varies depending on the site location. We were activated in November 2022. We are recruiting for 2 years. And our duration of a trial is about 5 years, and we are targeting an enrollment of about over 5,000 subjects. Next slide, please. So why participate? It was said earlier that some studies may or may not share results. With our study, we're not sharing results because it's research and experimental use only. However, there are a lot of benefits to still participating. One of these include contributing to the diagnostic advances in pancreatic disease through a novel approach using exosomes and biomarkers. Also, we can contribute to help generating evidence for improving patient survival rates through early detection. And lastly, we want to create actionable awareness to patients, family members of their risk in developing pancreatic cancer. Patients in this day and age should be empowered with the knowledge to make and create their own kind of care with their providers. Next slide, please. So if you want to learn more, there's my contact information, a phone number, email, there's QR codes, but at the end of the day, please get in touch with us. We would love to hear from you. And I would just like to leave with one last thing, which is our vision, a world where illness is never diagnosed too late. And with that, I will turn it over to Shruti for the next speaker. Thank you so much.
I'm going to jump in with some commentary one more time. Sorry, Shruti. And thank you very much for that. I want to say why Mission Cure is excited about this opportunity and hopes that people with pancreatitis will participate. As you know, and we have a blog on our website, at least certain pancreatitis patients with certain variants should be getting regular pancreatic cancer screening, but that is not everybody can do that, and it's very involved. And so we really do think having a blood-based screen will help detect cancer earlier and less invasively. But there was another blood-based pancreatic cancer screen that was briefly on the market. It's been taken off. And when we started talking to healthcare providers, to doctors about using it for their pancreatitis patients, they said that they didn't feel that it was validated for that population. And so we really want this tool to have enough data on people with PRFS1 and other forms of pancreatitis for them to be able to say in a convincing way that it is effective for these groups.
Well said. Thank you, Megan.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Megan. And thank you for informing our patient community about the ExoLuminate trial, Dr. Dunny. If successful, this trial can transform pancreatic cancer detection and treatment options for at-risk individuals. Participation in this study offers a chance to contribute to advancements in detection and management, impacting the lives of patients facing pancreatic cancer. If there are any questions for Dr. Dunny, I see some of them cropping up on the Q&A section already. Please type them into the box and we'll address them. I now welcome our fourth panelist, Dr. Gregory Cote, Professor of Medicine and Division Head of Gastroenterology and Hepatology at Oregon Health and Science University. He is a practicing gastroenterologist and clinician scientist with expertise in medical pancreatology and interventional endoscopy. He is the study chair of the SHARP trial, recruiting in 20 sites across the USA and one location in Canada. The SHARP trial he will present investigates an outpatient endoscopic procedure as a potential treatment for patients with recurrent acute pancreatitis and pancreas divisum. The study aims to understand the procedure's effectiveness in reducing episodes of recurrent acute pancreatitis, with the potential to enhance treatments and improve the quality of life for individuals with this condition. Over to you, Dr. Cote.
Thanks, Shruti and Megan and Mission Cure for your support of this ongoing study. Shruti nicely outlined the overarching objective of this. So this is a randomized intervention trial, back to the first speaker, that is supported by the National Institute of Health. And it's evaluating the role of a procedure that's actually used quite a bit in practice now, ERCP. So for those of you who have pancreatitis that are on this webinar, you may very well be familiar with this procedure. This is something that is already offered in clinical practice for both recurrent acute pancreatitis as well as for patients with chronic pancreatitis. Yet this procedure is offered in spite of the fact that we actually have fairly limited data on how effective it is or if it's effective at all. So this trial is restricted to a very specific patient population, patients who have pancreas divisum, which I'll describe in greater detail on the next slide, and a syndrome of recurring episodes of acute pancreatitis, which is typically severe pain that is associated with elevation in biochemistries, blood tests, or imaging that shows inflammation in the pancreas. These episodes almost always require patients to go to the hospital, especially in the early stages. And these episodes occur without clear warning to the individual or clear trigger. So we are starting to determine if this intervention of sphincterotomy through ERCP, enlarging the opening of the duct, can reduce or eliminate these episodes and improve a variety of other outcomes of interest to these patients, including quality of life. Next slide. So about 90% of people are born with what I would call standard duct anatomy, and that's shown in the upper drawing there. You can see the pancreas with the duct draining through the major papilla alongside the common bile duct. And this is a nice anatomic reminder why gallstones can cause pancreatitis in those individuals. But then about 7 to 10% of people are born with pancreas divisum. And this is where the duct, as you can see in the lower drawing, drains into the intestine through a separate so-called lesser or minor opening. And when this was first described more than 40 years ago, it was believed that for some patients, that opening would become stenotic or small as a person aged. And as a result of that opening being too small, it would lead to hypertension within the duct and trigger pancreatitis. So for decades now, many doctors, myself included, believe that ERCP, an enlargement of that opening through sphincterotomy, can help patients, but it is based on very little and arguably no data to support it. And the procedure itself, unfortunately, is not risk-free. So it's very important to know if it actually will benefit patients, because it's a procedure that can cause pancreatitis, among other complications. What makes this whole disease very confusing is that most patients with pancreas divisum are asymptomatic. They don't even know that they have it. So to be eligible for the study, we are only enrolling adult patients, so 18 years of age and older. Their pancreatitis could have begun earlier in life, but we are only randomizing patients who are 18 and older. They must have pancreas divisum seen on an MRI, MRCP, which is typically how this is diagnosed. And like I said, they must have had at least 2 attacks of pancreatitis, one of them being in the last 2 years. There should be no other obvious explanation for pancreatitis, such as very elevated triglycerides that would require a different type of treatment first. And if a patient's already undergone this procedure, they would not be eligible. So really, it's a combination of the pancreatitis episodes, the pancreas divisum, no other obvious cause, and no prior treatment on the duct. Next slide. So what happens if you're in the SHARP trial? Well, after the study has, of course, been explained to you, and that your doctor believes that you are eligible for this, you undergo a standard endoscopic ultrasound procedure. This is a widely used, minimally invasive diagnostic test, which allows us to examine the whole pancreas and reassure both the patient and the doctor that nothing has been missed. What could be missed? Well, to Harmeet's earlier presentation, small tumors in the pancreas, chronic calcific pancreatitis, so stones in the pancreatic duct. If these are present, they are not eligible for SHARP, because then the attention would be focused less so on the pancreas divisum and more on the treatment of the stone itself. But if the pancreas otherwise appears normal, other than showing this ductal variant anatomy of divisum, then the patient is randomized while they're asleep all at the same time to either go ahead and undergo this ERCP procedure with sphincterotomy using standard techniques, or the patient does not undergo the procedure. To date, we've actually already randomized 126 individuals, and we are hoping to get to 234. To the earlier presentation, this has been very closely followed to make sure that we are not incurring any undue harm on individuals, and our data safety monitoring board has been following us very closely, and that does not appear to be the case. Next slide. Briefly, to go over some of the details, as Shruti mentioned, we have approximately 20 centers across the United States. We have 1 center in Canada, in Winnipeg. The study basically involves, of course, the initial visit to determine eligibility, sign informed consent, and complete some questionnaires about your quality of life. Then the second visit would be the endoscopic procedures. A third visit would be an X-ray procedure done 30 days after the procedure to make sure that there are no stents left in the pancreas. And then a fourth in-person visit, which occurs about 1.5 years after the initial procedure. And that's to do an MRI on the pancreas to check for any changes that may have occurred that the patient would be unaware of. The MRI, the X-ray, and the endoscopic procedures are all paid for by the study. So these are not billed to your insurance. The only things that are billed to your insurance are any care that's required to take care of pancreatitis symptoms and so on throughout the follow-up period. We actually would like to follow all patients enrolled for up to 4 years, since this is, again, an inconsistent syndrome that can flare at various times. Patients are paid $125 after the 30-day follow-up visit, and then an additional $125 at the 18-month follow-up visit. And the study also includes free testing for diabetes and pancreatic digestive insufficiency at both baseline as well as 18 months after enrollment for those that don't already have these diagnoses. Next slide. So why would this benefit a participant? Well, if you're enrolled and have the procedure, you may experience benefit if it proves that the procedure is helpful. On the other side of it, if the procedure proves to be unhelpful and you're randomized to the no ERCP group, you may avoid the risks of a procedure that proves to be unhelpful. So it may help you one way or the other. The principal benefit, though, is clearly to individuals who have this syndrome down the road. It will definitely help providers determine when we should offer ERCP or if we should offer it at all to patients with pancreatitis. And since this is a procedure that's offered for a variety of other pancreatitis syndromes, including chronic pancreatitis, we anticipate what we learn in this study will be very helpful in guiding both clinical management as well as future studies on ERCP and other interventions for patients with acute and chronic pancreatitis. As a trial participant, you will be very closely monitored both by your local providers as well as by the providers looking after you at the study site if you're not already being treated there. And like I said, you will definitely help others with the same condition as you as a participant. So if you want to learn more about the study, I'd encourage you to visit our study website, which is pancreatitis.com. And there is a portal there to enter your information if you would like to be contacted by us to discuss the study in greater detail. Our clinical trials link is there, and you can see my email as well as our project manager listed at Oregon Health and Science. Next slide.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cote.
Thanks, Shruti.
I'm just going to leave this slide up there for a second. Thank you so much for informing our patient community about the SHARP trial. And these are the recruiting locations for the trial within the US and Canada. By participating, patients can actively contribute to advancing medical knowledge and treatment options while receiving medical monitoring and play a significant role in shaping the future of pancreatitis care. A quick reminder to the audience to type in any questions for Dr. Cote in the Q&A box.
One more comment on this one before we get to Jonathan. This is a really important study because I know a lot of people on this webinar have had ERCPs. And I think when people are in a lot of pain, the doctor wants to do something for them and they want to do something to try to relieve it. But there's also a financial incentive for healthcare institutions to do procedures like this. And so it's extra important in that case to really look at the science and see, especially with a procedure that has risks, like it can cause pancreatitis, to look at the research and see whether it's effective and what the benefits and the costs are. So thank you, Dr. Cote.
Thank you, Megan. I now welcome our fifth and final panelist, Jonathan Cole, a chronic pancreatitis patient who participated in the pilot phase of the ExoLuminate drug trial based out of Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. that Dr. Jill Smith headed. Dr. Smith hopes to get funding for the next phase of the trial. With more people participating, it could start next year. Jonathan is the Business Development and Sales Director for Sensites.ai in Los Angeles. I'm just gonna stop my screen share so me and Jonathan are able to have a quick chat.
Hey guys.
Jonathan, hello. Thank you for being here. Jonathan was diagnosed with pancreatitis at the age of 11. After 9 years of living with the pain, flares, and hospitalizations associated with pancreatitis episodes, he was found to have the CFTR1 gene mutation and was later diagnosed with chronic pancreatitis. He has suffered the stigma associated with the disease and opioid use from a young age and wanted to share his experience participating in the ExoLuminate trial. We're happy to have you with us, Jonathan. So let's get into the conversation. Yes?
Absolutely. So just to start it off here, so you guys heard a little bit of background about myself, and honestly, I was really tired of going through the pain, and I had just kind of given up hope. And, with that, my parents had been telling me maybe you should look up a research study. So I kind of started researching clinical trials, and that's how I found the Proglamide study and Dr. Jill Smith, based out of Georgetown University. So it was simple and easy. I went onto the web portal and I applied, and I emailed Dr. Smith with some information about me and to see if I qualified. And after that, there was a simple onboarding process in which I filled out basic information such as a pain scale and some other basic information. And then I got blood work before going to visit Dr. Smith in person, where we had our first in-person visit, and I was prescribed the Proglamide. And as somebody with chronic pancreatitis and chronic pain from the age of 11 years old, I know pain very well. And I've always imagined that me and my dad would laugh about, like, maybe there's a magic pill out there. It's the 21st century. And I started the Proglamide trial, and I was able to feel a lot better. After starting the trial, my pain went down. So I believe I was in for 3 months or 6 months, but in that time, I only had 2 attacks versus a lot more in the other time. But for example, I used to eat 2,000 calories a day, 1,500 calories a day, which is not good. I'm 6'2". I'm a big guy. I need to eat. So it was really hard for me. So when I got on Proglamide, I was able to, I was exercising, I was able to eat, and it was kind of the healthiest I've ever felt in my life. It was a really good time on the study. So after that, I got off the drug, and I had a really bad attack, and I was hospitalized. During the research study, I would get the drug shipped to my house, and then I would take it 3 times a day and participate in it. It was a really simple and easy process. I had to go get blood work at the local lab twice and check my levels at the end of each month, if I remember correctly. And then I went back for a final visit with Dr. Smith, so just to discuss the next steps and kind of where people are at with Proglamide and some of the studies for pancreatitis and some of the promises that it has and some of the effects, which is super interesting. And I think that it's very early in development, but just from my personal experience, I would consider it a success on my part. And that's a little bit about the experience using Proglamide and being in the research study. It was I would say it was a 10 out of 10 process if you wanted me to rate it out of 10. So sure.
That's great. Thank you so much for saying that, Jonathan. And in terms of the whole clinical trials process itself, do you have any suggestions for our patient community? Would you recommend that they sign up for clinical trials? And if so, why?
Yeah, so absolutely. For caregivers, I think we need to bridge the gap of education between the patient and the actual study. I'm a very tech savvy guy, so I was able to scroll down Google, but there was only 11 or 12 people in that study, and that was kind of disheartening to me because I felt like there's a lot more people suffering from pancreatitis, and maybe some of them are not tech savvy and are older, and caregivers need to realize that and provide marketing material or search engine optimization to put these clinical studies at the top of Google where people could see it, or they need to research it in more public places, or there needs to be one specific place where people can, okay, here is the available studies, like a bulletin board or something like that. And for patients, you need to really take it into your own hands. That 10 minutes of research or 1 hour, if you're kind of older, maybe it takes you a while to go through the iPad, but it's worth it at the end of the day if you're able to find a clinical study. And if you're somebody who is desperate like me, I knew from the age of 11 years old I'm going to have pancreatitis the rest of my life. So I kind of just figured, screw it. What's the worst that could happen? I could feel better. And that's what happened, right? So, if you're stubborn like me, maybe open your mind to possibilities. There are ways that you can get off the pain. When I was on Proglamide, I didn't have to take any pain medicine. We've mentioned that, I've been on opioids since the age of 11 and dealt with a lot of the stigmas. So, when I was on that, I didn't have to take any of that. And that was a huge relief in my life and took a lot of stress out of my life. So I think I just want to say thank you guys for having me. I'm grateful to be able to share my testimony. And yeah, thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your participation experience with our community, Jonathan. I'm sure they'll find it valuable. I'll now cross over to our Q&A session and hand it off to Megan so we could go through some questions that we've already had sent in and some that have been dropped into the box during the webinar. Over to you, Megan.
Thank you. And I want to start by answering some of the questions that just popped up about the Programide study and the reason why Dr. Smith is not on here. So the study that Jonathan was in was a pilot study, kind of like Dr. Pandal is doing, and it only intended to have a small number of patients. And I know that Dr. Smith has applied for funding for the next stage of the study. So hopefully she will get it, in which case, and I believe Dr. Pandal may be working with her on that study. If that gets funded, there will be a larger study in different parts of the country with more people. Dr. Pandal, is there anything to add on that?
No, Dr. Smith is performing in a couple sites in the country, and we're one here in Los Angeles. So, but as you indicated, Megan, she's waiting to get word that the National Institutes of Health will support the project.
Great. Wonderful.
Again, Programide has been around for a long time too, so it's known to be safe. It's not been used in the United States much, but in Asia it has, with safety.
Yes, and Shruti, I actually don't have the previous questions right in front of me, so in a minute I'll give you the opportunity to pose those. I do want to take on a kind of a big picture question that Mohit Kumar has asked, which is regarding our timeline, and heard that Mission Cure set a timeline of 10 years to find a cure 5 years ago when we started. And will we really be able to do that in 5 more years? And will it be one that fits for everybody? And so I'll say at the beginning that when we said we wanted effective therapies in 10 years, that a lot of people told us, oh no, that's too short. It takes a lot longer than that. But we were pretty determined, and we've made some progress. And I do believe that we will identify effective therapies within the next 5 years. These trials here are on the way to that. And some of them, as I mentioned before, like the paracalcitol, is readily available if it is shown to be effective. I don't think it will be for all types of pancreatitis. I think one of the approaches that we at Mission Cure have taken in what we call our cure strategy is that to really stop pancreatitis, you have to understand what is causing the inflammation of the pancreas. And a lot of the causes turn out to be genetic, and we're looking at treatments that address the genetic drivers. And you'll hear about more about those on future webinars. And so we probably won't have one size fits all for everybody, but I am hopeful that we will have at least one and hopefully more effective things within 5 years. I would be remiss if I did not say that we do need resources to make these things, to get these trials underway. Clinical trials are very expensive. We're working on very efficient ones, but we're kind of relying on contributions from our community, and then also finding investors and pharmaceutical companies that will invest their own resources to move these things forward. So we can use people's support on that. Thank you for answering the questions. A lot of our panelists have answered questions as we've gone along. Shruti, okay. How do I participate in the studies? Is there a website for all studies available? Yes, on our website, and Sky will put in the chat the page, we have a list of pancreatitis, chronic and recurrent acute pancreatitis clinical trials. And that includes these and actually a few more. And then there's something called clinicaltrials.gov, which is a website put up by the federal government that lists all trials. And it's always interesting to look through that. You can search for specific things.
Megan, I'll quickly address a question that I'm sure quite a few of our participants might have. Considering we have many people joining us from outside the US as well. So if the panelists could address this one, can only US citizens and residents participate in these trials? As in, can residents of other countries participate too, if they're willing to travel? And do they need health insurance with US coverage if they need to qualify? If the panelists could answer this query, please.
This is Steve Handel. You don't have to be a citizen of the United States. And you can travel to our sites and register. I don't think there is, as far as I know, any restriction to citizenship or something like that. The issue will be, what do you call it? The details of travel and the number of visits and all those kind of things. We do try in many of our trials to make them so that the blood samples, for example, and some of the measurements are done at a distance. So we try to accommodate the best we can.
Then maybe I can
answer
the ExoLuminate study. Very similar study, or very similar answer that Dr. Pendle just said. You don't necessarily need to be a US citizen. You can come to a participating US site and travel there. Right now we are US based, but in the near future, we're considering opening up to Canada and some select international sites. So I would just encourage looking at the website in the future.
And Shruti, if I can comment just from an overarching clinical trials in the US perspective, it is not a requirement for trials that are done in the US that you be a US citizen, unless that's in the eligibility criteria. Those eligibility criteria are listed on clinicaltrials.gov. So if you find a trial in the US that you think might be a good fit for you and that is not listed on there, then it is not a requirement. And you should contact the investigator or the doctor who's running that study or the nursing staff to find out more. But it is, generally speaking, in the US, that's not a requirement unless it's specifically named in the clinical trial protocol.
That's great. Thank you so much, Julianne.
I think we need to wrap
almost
up.
Yes, at the end of our scheduled time. So thank you so much for all of your questions and participation. And like our panelists spoke to you, the best way to get to know more details about the trials themselves are, number one, we'll post the recording of this webinar on our website. And if you're registered, you will receive a recording of that. And the links that were shared during the webinar will also be in the blog post accompanying the webinar recording. So you'll get to have access to those as well. And we are at the end of time, and our creative communications manager, Sky, will now offer our closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Shruti. And thank you everyone for joining our webinar. On behalf of Mission Cure's team, I extend our sincere gratitude and appreciation to all of our panelists for their time, effort, and support in making this webinar possible. It was a pleasure working with all of you. So as we mentioned, we post resources created for our patient community as part of our patient education program. Please subscribe to our newsletter on our website and follow our social media channels to access these resources and more. We invite all of you to fill out a survey after you leave the webinar. It'll automatically pop up on your browser, and it only takes a minute to complete. Your responses will help create resources needed and valued by you. So this is really important for us. Registered attendees will receive a recording of this webinar via email. We will also upload this to our website tomorrow, a day after the event. And our virtual door is always open if you have any questions or feedback. Thank you everyone again, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.